The cramped, single-story house looked like it was about to fall apart. It leaned to one side, built on top of a hill covered in bare grass, where the eastern wind blew the strongest. A dirt road connected the house to the town at the bottom of the hill, where there were trees and the wind didn't blow as hard. I liked the house. It was remote, private. An old man in stained clothes, several sizes too big, and a worn trucker's hat, waved to me as I drove up to the place. His legs looked about as crooked as the place he lived. I parked my dirty green Sebring, grabbed my cowboy hat from the passenger seat, and stepped out of the car. "Roy?" I said, walking up and shaking the old man's hand. He was Kool, and his handshake was limp. He carried the faint odor of rotting leaves and blood. I didn't like him. "That's me. What can I do you for?" "We spoke on the phone. I'm here to settle that issue you're having." One of his bushy eyebrows raised. He looked me up and down. "Awful young, ain't you?" "I suppose." He petted the thicket of gray fuzz that covered the lower half of his face while he studied me. The old man's gaze drifted to my car and the busted fender held on by a generous amount of duct tape, and my very bald tires. His eyes settled on the piles of clothes and junk in the back seat. "I picked her up in Kentucky after my truck didn't start one morning. I've had her about a week now." He stroked the rat's nest on his chin. Something about me or my car must have convinced him I was legit. "Thanks for taking the job, son." He gripped me around the shoulder. "You mind? These legs don't work like they used to." I said I didn't, and he led me to the rear of the house. "Sorry I was vague on the phone. You understand. Where are you from?" he asked. "I'm not much for sticking around a place long. Got a bit of the travel bug in me." "Good. Travel is good. I was the same way when I was young. Then I met the missus and settled down here." "It's nice here. Plenty of open space. Small town nearby. I wouldn't mind a similar situation." "Mm-hmm." He nodded his head. Next to the back porch, a rock stairwell led down to a windowless metal door framed by a brick and cement foundation. Roy gestured to the stairs. I stepped down. He followed with his hand still on my shoulder. We came to the door and the old man squeezed around my waist and unlocked it with a key. I opened the door. The basement was dark, and the air smelled of dusty old books and mildew. Roy pushed past me and hobbled into the dark room. I heard a click. A dirty yellow light illuminated the basement. Roy held a chain dangling beneath a single bare light bulb hung in the center of the room. "There she is," he said, and pointed to a simple wooden table surrounded by 4 simple wooden chairs. They looked handmade. On top of the table was a wooden coffin that also looked simple and handmade. I followed him over to the table and looked inside. Stuffed into a coffin too small to fit her bulk was Roy's wife. She lay in her Sunday best. Her swollen arms rested atop her apple-shaped torso. Her skin was the waxy pale blue complexion of good cheese. Or bad milk. Someone applied an excessive amount of blush to her round cheeks and so much lipstick it looked like she'd been messily eating berries. "She's already dead," I said. "Yes. Well, she ain't all dead." "How so? She in a coma or something?" I asked. He removed his hat and ran a hand over his dimpled bald head. He furrowed his brows and chewed his bottom lip, and thought his words over. "You see her neck?" I looked. 2 Nasty puncture marks, red and swollen from infection, dotted the soft spot of her neck on the right side. I reached into the coffin and tilted her pudgy chin to get a better look. She felt cold. "She feels dead," I said. "Well, she ain't," he assured me. I poked at the base of the puncture wounds. They were warm. A yellowish custard oozed from the 2 holes and ran down her neck and onto the pillow her head rested on. A little got on my hand and I wiped it on the side of my jeans. "What do you want me to do?" "Wait here till she comes back to life. You can kill her with these." The old man reached under a blanket at her feet and fished around until he came up with an old rubber mallet and a chair leg sharpened to a point. He handed them to me. I looked at the tools, then the old man. "You think she's a vampire?" I said. He nodded. "So you're going to pay me to sit around, twiddle my thumbs, and wait for the missus to return from the dead, then stick her with this?" I held up the sharpened chair leg. "I'd do it myself, but I'm afraid I'll choke when the time comes." "Understandable. Murder ain't easy. It takes a certain temperament to be good at it. Kinda like folks who enjoy horseshit." Roy patted the coffin. "I'll leave you to it," he said. I watched Roy as he left the basement. He wasn't bow-legged anymore, and he'd lost his hobble. Curious. I'd have to ask him about it after I finished the task at hand. One thing at a time, as they say. After an hour of waiting for the old gal to rise again, I started getting antsy. I get that way when there's a full moon out, and according to my moon log, there was. People who get weird during a full moon are called lunatics. I get weird on a full moon, but I wouldn't call myself a lunatic. Another hour passed, and I thought to myself, if I'm ever hired to kill an alleged vampire again, I'll bring a book to read. Eventually, I dozed off. Of course, that's when Roy's wife rose from her coffin. When she sat up, the gas in her corpse must have shifted, because she power farted and woke me from my nap. She rubbed the sleep from her eyes and announced herself to the room. "I am Mildred," she said. "Hello," I said. "Where am I? Who are you? Why am I in a coffin?" All valid questions. Her memory seemed a little foggy, but she just returned from the dead, so that's to be expected. I felt I owed her an explanation, so I filled her in on the recent events. "You're in the basement of your house, and I'm the fella who's gonna stick this chair leg into your chest because you're a vampire, which is why you're in a coffin." "That explains the terrible hunger," she said. "I'd assume so. Sorry about this, ma'am, but I have to stake you now." Mildred hissed at me. She lunged for my throat, but her hips stuck in the too small coffin, and instead, she scooted an inch across the table towards me. Lucky for me, I wasn't standing that close. She hissed and scooted the coffin towards me another inch. We stared at each other in awkward silence. She looked embarrassed, but that could have been because of the excessive blush. Mildred sighed and laid back in her coffin. "Well, get on with it," she said. "I'm only doing my job, ma'am. No need to be huffy." I positioned the stake above her breast and brought the rubber mallet down. The wooden chair leg buried itself into her skin. Mildred wailed in pain. The shrill shriek echoed off the basement walls. Above me, the light bulb popped, and broken glass rained down on me. Now, my only source of light was the dim glow of the rising moon. I wish I'd brought earplugs. Killing vampires is a loud job, I thought. Blood pooled around the wound, staining the fabric of her dress. I smashed the mallet down again. The screaming stopped. Mildred was dead. You finished up in here? I jumped and spun around. Roy stood on the steps behind me with a heavy-looking lid for the coffin tucked under his arm. I hadn't heard him come in. She didn't suffer, did she? I looked at Mildred's face, filled with agony and covered in blood splatter. You'll be wanting me to put the lid on, I said. If you wouldn't mind. He handed me the lid and found some nails for me. When the job was done, we got on either side of the coffin and lifted it off the table. Roy didn't seem to struggle with the weight as much as I did. We carried the coffin out of the basement, up the stairs, and into the chilly October night. The full moon lit our way to the freshly dug pit behind the house. Roy must have dug it while I was waiting to stake his wife. The crisp air felt good, but the full moon made the skin beneath my clothes tingle and itch. We reached the pit, and on the count of 3, we dropped the coffin in. It landed with a thunk, and the lid popped off, exposing Mildred's agonized vampire face. Roy didn't ask me to reposition the lid, and I was glad. The pit was deep. I didn't want to climb in. Well, that's done, he said, and dusted off his hands and spit a loogie into a patch of bare grass. The itch was getting worse. I fidgeted and looked over at the pile of dirt. It was a fair amount. The burial will cost you extra, I said. I scratched the back of my leg with the toe of my boot. I'm not ready to bury her yet. Not until I toss you in with her, Roy said in a husky, youthful voice. Roy was no longer an old man, and his clothes were no longer baggy. In the blink of an eye, he'd become a well-built gentleman in his late 40s, wearing clothes that were a tad too tight. You've changed, I said and scratched my lower back. Roy smiled, showing off his 2 long fangs. I wasn't lying earlier when I said I couldn't kill her. I loved her. But there isn't enough room for 2 vampires in this town. It came down to survival. Why did you bite her then? I said, pulling off my boots and socks. It was an accident. I sleepwalk. Happens to the best of us, I suppose. I unbuttoned and removed my plaid shirt, then folded it and laid it on the ground next to my boots. Hair sprouted along my spine and over my shoulders. Roy's confident smirk fell. I inhaled and held it for 5 seconds, then exhaled for 5 more seconds, then shook my body up. A little relaxation trick I learned in spin class before I ate everyone and had to move. What are you doing? Roy asked. Getting comfortable, I said. Roy watched in horror as I shifted and changed. My body broadened. Coarse hair grew over my neck, shoulders, and down my spine. Muscles swelled and shifted beneath my skin. I let out a whoop that grew in pitch until it became a howl. With one last crack, my ankles lengthened, lifting me onto the balls of my clawed feet. I stood there in my lupine glory, looking more like Benicio del Toro's Wolfman than Lon Chaney Jr.'s. If Del Toro wore fitted bootcut jeans and a Lone Star belt buckle, that doubled as a bottle opener. It'll be nice to settle down. You're right, though. This town ain't big enough for 2. I said and swiped a claw across Roy's face, removing his lower jaw. His eyes went wide. He clutched the spot where his chin and tongue used to be. My next swing took off his fingers. Roy dropped to his knees and gargled something at me. I couldn't understand him because his jaw was missing. I swung again. Roy's head sailed through the air, landing in the grave next to Mildred. His body collapsed to the ground. I wiped my claws off on my jeans, then gathered my clothes and headed for my new house. The sun would take care of the rest. After my lycanthropic episode was over, I unloaded my car and showered, then sat on the porch and popped the top off a Coke bottle I found in the fridge. A kind from Mexico, with the real sugar. I kicked my legs up on the porch railing and reclined in Roy's simple wooden rocking chair and took a long drink. The people of the small town at the bottom of the hill were beginning their morning. Bedroom lights click on in the fading dark as farmers started their trucks and tractors. Cows lowed in their pastures, anticipating breakfast. It was nice, idyllic even. I liked the house. It was remote and had a town filled with great dinner options.
Thanks for calling. Looks like Roy made a huge mistake in hiring a werewolf. Talk about biting the hand that feeds you. Or, in this case, decapitating the head that feeds you? Nah. This is why it's essential to check references and pedigree, or else you might end up with someone a bit rough around the edges. Still, I don't understand why they couldn't all get along. Whatever happened to live and let unlive? Well, that's it for the show. Be sure to like and subscribe. And don't forget to click the little bell icon so you know when the next show is out. As for me, I'll be waiting right here for the next 13th caller.